there's no particular context to my speech because I didn't feel that it was warranted in this case, in the sense that I'm not playing a role. That's what I mean by that. So the title of the speech is very simple. It's called An Appeal to the American People, and hopefully that will provide enough introduction to my speech. Every so often throughout the course of history, the human race finds itself faced with those difficult challenges that help to define the qualities which make us innately human. We find ourselves faced with challenges that directly threaten the way of life that had heretofore defined the very tenets of our civilized society. Such situations bring out the very best in the human race. And they allow for that absolutely necessary process of redefinition, which allows for humanity to continue down the road of progress. This idea of redefinition finds a very specific relevance to our own American condition. We are citizens of a nation which prides itself on its own ideas of tolerance and equality. We pride ourselves on the liberty and justice for all promised in our Pledge of Allegiance, and on the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness promised by our Declaration of Independence. Our forefathers dreamed that America would be a beacon light of freedom and hope for the rest of the world, that it would be a testament to the inerrant ability of a determined and independent people to shape the destiny of the very world in which they live. With such a great burden placed upon us as a nation, we constantly find ourselves faced with the challenge to remain a progressive force within the world in which we live. This is not just an insignificant challenge, and it is not one we face merely of our own volition. It is instead an integral part of our very existence. America now finds itself faced with the very difficult challenge presented to the institution of marriage by the insistence of same-sex couples that they be allowed to share in this right. This issue cannot simply be sidestepped as if it were an insignificant or ephemeral challenge to the status quo, but instead it must be realized for what it truly is, a chance for America to prove its worth as the unchallenged leader of the free world and as the proponent of freedom for all of civilization. The very core of the same-sex marriage issue rests on the claim that the prevention of marriage to those same-sex couples who wish to pursue it is a direct violation of the 14th Amendment. This most precious of amendments, which holds that no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws, now finds itself the center of a very fierce conflict over exactly what equal protection of the law should entail. The first American judicial body to rule that same-sex marriages might be made legal was the Supreme Court for the state of Hawaii. This august body used its state's constitution's own equal protection clause to justify the extension of marriage rights to same-sex couples. The majority opinion in the 1993 case, Bayer versus Lewin, held that if the state allowed one woman to marry one man and prevented her from marrying one woman, then the state was making a gender-based difference between those two prospective spouses under the law. In the even more recent Massachusetts Supreme Court decision in the 2003 case, Goodridge versus Department of Public Health, the majority opinion used their state's equal protection clause to justify the extension of marriage rights to same-sex couples. It is absolutely without doubt that Americans place great worth on the idea of an equal placement of each citizen before the laws of this nation. The great question, then, which faces every American in considering the particular issue of same-sex marriage is whether or not a prevention of this right to same-sex couples creates an unequal placement of each citizen before the law. The answer to this question is an indubitable yes. What possible explanation could there be for allowing a man to marry a woman, but preventing him from marrying another man, other than that the law is providing a distinction between those two prospective spouses that is anything but equal? It is an unacceptable and utterly antiquated form of thinking, and it is one that cannot and should not stand the test of time in a nation that so emphatically professes the progressive values of freedom, liberty, and equality. With the passage of the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996 by the United States Congress, the federal government, in essence, left the decision regarding same-sex marriage up to the states. The act holds that states should choose the effect that any act of marriage passed by another state will hold in their state. The act also amends the Dictionary Act of Federal Law to provide express federal definitions of the terms marriage and spouse, only in deference to the heterosexual idea of the two terms. By leaving an issue of this magnitude up to each state's discretion, the federal government is simply ignoring the issue and saying that the prevention of a basic human right is warranted if one particular state feels that its own social mores will be offended. Why must our nation's leaders duck and cover the minute that they are faced with an issue of contention or difficulty? Why do we not make the connection between the issue of same-sex marriages and other previously taboo forms of marriage, such as interracial marriage? In the 1967 United States Supreme Court case Loving versus Virginia, which legalized interracial marriage, the majority opinion stated that marriage is one of the basic civil rights of man, fundamental to our very existence. With that very blatant statement of marriage's importance to the American citizen, what possible right does anyone have to refuse this right to a citizen of our nation? There will always be citizens of our nation who oppose change, even if it is in the right direction. The most relevant historical example of this was the vast opposition to school integration throughout the 1960s. That was an issue that many of our nation's legislators hoped to leave up to the states, primarily because they did not have the fortitude and bravery to face that issue like the proponents of liberty and equality which they claimed to be. Let us not follow in the timid footsteps of our forebears, but instead realize the rallying call to progress found in our Constitution, which has existed since our nation's very founding. Too often, my fellow Americans, we leave the issue of same-sex marriage up to constitutional technicalities. However, the reality of the matter is that such a way of looking at the problem does little but to strip homosexual Americans of their very human decency. To say that granting marriage to same-sex couples is not an issue of moral right or wrong, but is instead subject to the wording of a document crafted over 220 years ago is to do nothing but to debase the issue and to strip it of its many very human elements. Legislators consider the issue of same-sex marriage in the abstract, or they support the helplessly victimized heterosexual married couples who have somehow had their own marriages attacked by these same-sex marriages. My fellow Americans, I am not speaking to you out of anger. I am not speaking to you out of condescension. I am speaking to you out of our sense of shared humanity. I am hoping to appeal to your sense of basic human decency because that is the sole consideration that one should have when deciding this issue. My friends, I do not ask that you to understand, and I do not ask that you empathize, because there is no possible way for you to understand the immense struggle which homosexual Americans face in their everyday lives. How could you know what it is like to live in the constant fear that if people know about your homosexual identity, that you will be ostracized from all connections? How could you know what it is like to be told by your very own mother that every time you fall in love, you are perpetrating a crime against nature? How could you honestly know what it is like to be told by your family that they can no longer afford to remain a part of your life because of the immense embarrassment and disappointment which you have caused them? How could you know what it is like to be told that the very God whom you pray to considers you to be an abomination before him? And then the most stinging insult is that you are considered unfit to share in the same benefits of lasting and loving relationships that your heterosexual equivalents are allowed. That is an unacceptable reality, to live as a second-class citizen. I am a homosexual American, and I am prevented from sharing in the American dream. I see no rights to life, liberty, and happiness. Instead, I see a land of fear and oppression. It is time for a change. Throughout America's past, we have faced many difficult challenges that have threatened to tear our very nation apart. And each time the American people have faced those challenges with strength and bravery. Our nation was forged in bravery, and it was conceived in the blood of our forefathers who gave their very lives that America might be a nation of freedom, liberty, and equality, that its people might know the benefit of human initiative, and that they might be a testament to the human will. As Americans, we must rally to the clarion call of liberty and equality and march down the road of freedom, allowing nothing to stand in our way. It is not for ourselves that we do this, nor is it for our forebears, but it is for the legacy of greatness which we shall leave in the heart of all men. America the free, America the brave, and America open to all people, regardless of race, creed, or sexual orientation. This should not be a dream, my fellow Americans. It should not be a thing of the distant future. It should be the reality in which we live. That is our generation's legacy. That is our charge. We shall be the generations of Americans that truly exemplifies the American dream. Let us all take heed and let us never forget, or we shall forever sink into the ever-grasping hands of tyranny and oppression. America forever, and America always. Thank you.